I'll say up front that miscarriage is a tough topic to discuss. It makes people uncomfortable. People who experience it through many times a lens of shame and a lens of isolation because they feel like they're alone. It's particularly tough, awkward, sensitive when a father talks to mothers about miscarriage because in addition to the silence about miscarriage, it's the silence that goes into uh, the parents and the experience of the parents. So all that said, right, I appreciate you letting me come and talk to you tonight. One of the news articles that is in the handout, and I don't know if might or might not be in an email that Bethany sent out, but Christy Teigen and John Legend, celebrity couple, announced they were expecting another child recently. Last week, they announced they had a miscarriage. And they have chosen to be kind of public with their grief. They say they had the miscarriage. They posted some pictures from the hospital of the tears and working through that. And I shared the story because it's an example of somebody speaking out against the silence. And many of the things, the emotions that they're talking about resonated with my experience and Christine's experience. But that story is emblematic of how this is sensitive because there's been some backlash that says, why are you talking about this? Why are you being public with your grief? This is not something that should be publicized. You should be being private about this. It's a tough topic. People get uncomfortable with it. People who experience it don't know how to talk about it with others. And people who have friends who experience it don't know what to say. So I'm not going to solve any of that, right? The outcome of this talk is not going to be that all of a sudden awkwardness goes away. But I will share my story because miscarriage is a place of pain that is real. And it's a place where there's an opportunity to provide mercy and where there's an opportunity to carry each other's burdens. And hopefully some of what my story involves can provide insight into that. So basic mechanics of our experience, right? We had 2 miscarriages in 2004. So our first 2 pregnancies, they ended somewhere between 6 weeks and 9 weeks of pregnancy. We had 2 girls who were born after that. One is now a sophomore in high school. One's a 7th grader. We had another miscarriage in 2010, and then we had a 3rd daughter in 2011, who's now a 4th grader. And at that point, we said, right, our biological experience of parenthood is over. We are content with 3 living children we have. There was a shift, kind of, I'll talk about my story and then some of the stuff that Christine and I went through, and then I'll bring it back to some of my story again. When we had our first miscarriage, my initial reaction was that the loss is physically Christine's, and my loss is abstract. I'm not sure what to do with it, and I'm not sure if it's real. So we're in the Midwest. We had a friend from college who was getting married, and my roommate and his wife, my roommate from college was there with his wife. And at the reception, his wife and Christine were talking, and it came out that we had just had a miscarriage, and they were wrestling with infertility. And so the discussion is for both of us, the path from marriage into parenthood didn't line up with we can have kids if we decide we want to have kids, right? It had been a lot bumpier than we'd expected. And my roommate emailed me afterwards and said, hey, my wife told me about her discussion with Christine and just wants you to know you'll be in our prayers. I'm sorry for your experience of miscarriage. And I replied and I said, thank you. The loss is real for Christine because it's physical. And for me, it's abstract. I'm not sure what to do with it. But I had a discipline going back to junior high of journaling about formative and mundane events. And somewhere in high school, the journal became, just wrote letters, right? Dear Diary type of thing. And so I chose to write in my journal about the events of the miscarriage. And I wrote in my journal, Dear Child. And I started to unpack. Here was the events of pregnancy and the miscarriage. And through that, I started to unpack. Here were the things that I was hoping for. As a grieving father, and I'm giving identity to my child as my child, not just as an abstract thing. I'm giving identity to Christine as the mother of my child. And that, that was a change in how I looked at myself, right? And when I showed the first letter to Christine, it was one of the things that helped us, because the fact that I was grappling with something so abstract made it hard for her to know whether I was actually grieving or not. And so seeing the words that I had written affirmed to her that yes, this was something that hurt. And there was more, and there was something that there was, hope and joy and anticipation in addition to the loss. So through those three losses, I reacted to each of them differently. The first one, the doctor said to us, there's no biological reason that we would pinpoint that would say, here's why you lost your child. Happens in 25 to 30% of pregnancies. Under normal conditions, you are statistically normal. There's no biological reason we would be worried that you wouldn't be able to have children if you chose to try again. So I certainly didn't feel normal, but I felt like, okay, if this is something that happens and happens more often, then I realized, fine, we've paid our dues. Let's get on with life, right? We can put it behind us. When we had our second miscarriage, we're faced with a much different world. It's a world where biological parenthood might not ever happen for us. And again, there was no medical reason that the doctors could point to. So that was scary. A, that the biological parenthood might not happen. B, there was nothing we could pinpoint and say, we know why this happened. We know what went wrong. We know how to fix it. And coming to terms with a world where we couldn't solve that problem was really, really scary. One of the things that helped, so there's a biblical image, and I didn't have the words for this at the time, but it's something that I've come back to and kind of looking back on the experience. So in the Old Testament, there's the story of Elijah and his encounter with the prophets of Baal, right? And he defeats them, and then Jezebel says, I don't care that you beat the prophets, I'm still going to kill you. And Elijah gets discouraged, and he runs away into the wilderness. And God comes to him and says, Elijah, what are you doing here? And Elijah says, I'm tired, I'm discouraged, I've tried to dream, I've tried to do your work, it's pointless. So just kill me, because I'm all alone, and this is futile. And God says to Elijah, you're not done. I have a protege for you to train, and I've got 7,000 people who you didn't know about who haven't bowed their knee to Baal. So I am at work in the world, and I want you to join my work in the world. And it's an encouragement to Elijah that he's not alone, and it's a rebuke to him that he has been short-sighted in getting so self-centered with his grief. So after a second miscarriage, I was having dinner with a colleague of mine, and I was unpacking some of what I'd learned about miscarriage, the 25 to 30% of pregnancies that are lost. You do the math, it's a massive public health reality, and nobody talks about it. And it's stigmatized, and there's all this shame that comes with it, and there's other things that touch fewer people that get the medical research. And it was becoming a bit of a soapbox, because I wanted to feel like the world owed me something in my pain and in my neglect. And he had this sympathetic look in his face, and he said, look, I understand what you're going through. My mother has been working in tuberculosis advocacy in rural Massachusetts for a long time, and she's experienced a lot of what you're experiencing. And it was an Elijah on Mount Sinai moment, right? An encouragement that I was not alone, and a rebuke to not be so consumed by my pain that I couldn't see the other stories around me that overlapped with mine. So when we had our third miscarriage, it wasn't just kind of shock and what do I do with a world where I can't fix things? It was complete despair. And I felt like I'd allowed myself to hope for another child. I'd taken the risk of having a third child, and we talked about it, and we'd agreed we would take the risk. I thought I knew the drill because we'd had miscarriages, and like, okay, right. I was not prepared at all. And I slid into this feeling of complete despair and rejection of anything that symbolized new life. And when you are at Redeemer, you cannot avoid the reality of pregnancy and young children. And when you're having a loss and you have to come in Sunday in and Sunday out, that really hurts. And that despair turned into a resentment of everything around me that symbolized new life, not just the families at Redeemer, but everything vocationally. I said, I'm done. I'm done hoping. I'm done dreaming. I'm done trying hard things. I'm just plain done. So I had lunch with a friend from Redeemer who's since moved out of town. And he said, how are things going? And I said, Lord, have mercy. It was a phrase that he had used in his email to me as we were setting up a time to get together. And I said, we just had our third miscarriage and I'm feeling pretty discouraged, not sure what to do. I said, I know how you feel. We wrestled with infertility for a long time and we had 4 miscarriages. We didn't know if we'd ever be able to become parents. And now we have 4 children. Who knew that this would have happened? And you wouldn't know that if you looked at me. And it was another Elijah on Mount Sinai moment, right? Because if he had not told me that, he would have been prime candidate for me to be really angry at because he had a big family. And so again, it was the encouragement, Sean, you're not alone, and a bit of a chastisement. See other people's stories and listen to them rather than being consumed by your grief. So that's my story, right? Through my story, there's Christine's story, and there's a story of what's happening in our marriage. And the metaphor that I've used for this is we just had to ride the rapids. There's no solution. There's no 5-point plan. A lot of it was endurance. But there were a couple of things that were really hard, and there were a couple of things that we held on to. So the thing that was hard was we wanted to help each other through the experience of grief, and we wanted to support each other. And there were times when we did, and there were times when we didn't. And there were times when the didn't part of it actually caused pain. And it wasn't for lack of goodwill, and it wasn't for lack of effort, but we were experiencing the miscarriages in very different ways. And the differences in those experiences were sometimes challenging. So for me, some of it was that, in going through the process of a worldview that's being shattered, and I came up with ideas about what's it like to live in a world where you can't solve problems. That's a conceptual framework that I was comfortable with. It was a conceptual framework that didn't mean anything to Christine. So my efforts to talk about that framework didn't actually provide support. Some of it was when she didn't register with that framework, that was scary for me, partly because I wasn't solving her problem, and partly because she was experiencing the same events differently from me, and it threw into question, was my experience legitimate? So there's this back and forth of kind of fear that there's something wrong with me and inability to help the other person. And again, we didn't have words for this at the time, but the words that we've put onto it, if we look at intersection of childhood stories, and one of my powerful childhood stories is, Sean, you're alone. You have to figure this out on your own because there is nobody who's going to help you. And one of Christine's powerful childhood stories is you have to fix things, and you have to make them right, and you have to create order. And we came out of an evangelical faith tradition that emphasized the disciplines. It said you need to be reading your Bible regularly. You need to be praying. That will give you the experience of the presence of God. And when you experience the presence of God in the midst of trial, you will overcome and you will have stories of victory. So you can see how those things can intersect in some pretty ugly ways, right? Because I was feeling alone. I was withdrawing from Christine. That signaled to her that she was not able to solve the pain that I had. So in addition to now her child has died, she's not able to fix her husband's grief. Enter cycles of failure. And to the disciplines, it felt like the cosmos was silent, and the disciplines were bare knuckles, banging on a door that was closed. No, that's not the end of the story, right? It's not all that bleak. Where did we go from that? What were the things that helped us ride those rapids? One of the things, and this is something that I've grappled with over the years, and I'm still formulating the ideas. So bear with me. I'm going to use you all as an experiment to formulate the ideas. It was the role of body image in miscarriage and pregnancy, and then subsequently. and the way that that intersected for both of us. So I came into our marriage with a feeling that my body was my enemy. I had got my height early. With my height came a perception of clumsiness. With that perception of clumsiness came a feeling that my body doesn't work. So my default narrative is my body is my enemy, that it needs to be fixed. Now, in Genesis 3, you have the man and woman who are naked and unashamed, and that was, a gentle metaphor, symbol for me that said there's an opportunity to be seen and known and not be ashamed, which was completely mind-boggling for me. And yet, when we entered into marriage, there was something there that was true. When we had our miscarriage, that kind of kernel of healing was completely lost, because now my body that was my enemy had caused the death of my child and was inflicting pain on my best friend. And it didn't matter that it was, it's not medically my fault that this happened, right? But the emotions went to that position. And for Christine, coming with her own feelings of physical inadequacy and then having a body that did not carry a child to term, and then saying, why can I not even miscarry? Why do I have to go in to have surgery? That brought its own cycles. And I responded to that by saying, don't listen to the voices of shame. I want you to know that I love you and I believe you're beautiful. And it was not a voice of encouragement. It was a slap on the hand. Don't be ashamed of yourself, right? It didn't help. And she had similar responses to me, and I was not able to hear them. So the thing that helped us was a book called Why Beauty Matters that one of her friends gave to her. And unfortunately, I didn't bring my copy with me. But the starting point of that book is it looks at some of the false baggage that comes with the evangelical tradition and the way that it downplays the physical self for women. And it emphasizes be of sound mind, be of good character, right? And don't really think about your physical body because that's the flesh and that's evil. And it offers a different paradigm that says if you look through the biblical narrative, physical body is from God. It's part of what it means to be made in the image of God. When Christ became incarnate, he took on a physical body. When he rose from the dead, he took on a physical body. So the physical body is a gift to be cherished, to be nourished. And it was a paradigm shift that helped us unpack some of the hurt and helped us start to envision what would it look like to have a different way of looking at physical bodies. That's something that we continue to think about raising 3 young girls, right? And yeah, so 2 things about that. One, if you can get a hold of a copy, it's out of print, but if you can get a hold of a copy, I can't recommend it enough. If you want to borrow our copy, first person to talk to me afterwards will get a COVID-safe way of letting me borrow it. 2, I am not aware of anything like this for men. Someday, I hope somebody writes a book called The Importance of Being Handsome, because the message is just as important, right? Okay, one of the other things, and I'm not going to read out of the book because it's a little bit dark, but we had a symbol of an open hand, and this was a symbol that we had used when we entered into, when we made the decision to date, and when we made the decision to get married, and it carried with it this tension. We're both trained in the sciences, right? Mechanical engineering, pharmacy, we're both firstborns, we like to be in control. And the relationship, the journey of dating into engagement, into marriage, carried with it a risk. What pain will I encounter because of this? What pain will I inflict on you because of this? And so the open hand was a symbol that was foundational for us. It said we'll enter into the relational risk of dating and marriage, and we'll hold each other with an open hand. So in the midst of Christine experiencing the miscarriages differently, being faced with, will I hold her with an open hand, even though she doesn't see this the way that I do, was not just an encouragement, like it was a discipline. It was something that I had to hold on to, but it was a symbol that helped me work through that. Would I hold my children with an open hand? Would I love them and hope that they would be born without putting a condition that says, I will only love you and call you my child if you make it to childbirth? if you make it to healthy childbirth, if you make it to healthy childbirth and 2 years of life, 2 years of life plus growing up to look and to love the things that I love. That open hand is an ongoing symbol and discipline. And it's not that it's easy and it's not that we do it well, but it was a symbol that helped us work through some of these rapids. A couple other things, kind of sources of healing. So in a number of the books that Madeleine L'Engle writes, A Wind at the Door and Swiftly Tilting Planet, she camps on this theme of darkness and chaos, and it brings disorder into the world around you. And the response to that is a creative force that speaks beauty and order, and great books and great images that we love. And in the creation myth in Tolkien's Silmarillion, there's the same thing with Ilúvatar's creative song when he's creating Middle Earth, and Melkor speaking chaos and discord into it, and Ilúvatar responding. And so for us, as we've worked through this, the question that we've come back to is, in the midst of all this chaos and darkness and fragmentation, where's the creative beauty? Where's the voice that speaks order against this? Maybe not as kind of a deafening symphony, but is nonetheless kind of a voice of resistance. So for Christine, it was visual beauty. And in 2010, we commissioned a painting from Kyle Ragsdale to family portrait, 10th anniversary. And he put the two of us and our two girls at the time. And then when our youngest daughter was born in 2011, he took the painting back and added her. But when he did the painting, Christine said, Kyle, would you please add 3 crocuses? The crocuses are beautiful, they're fragile, they don't last very long. They're the symbols of our unborn children. Their lives were beautiful, their lives were fragile, they didn't last very long, but we still love them and we still claim them as part of our family. And Kyle, because he's Kyle, did an incredible job with the painting, but the painting now hangs in our living room. It's got a place of honor. And when we moved to the UK in 2014, it got its own special crate in the container. It went with us and it hung in our living room in the UK, and then it came back. For me, it's not so much visual beauty. My kids and I joke about what happens when I draw. It's not pleasant. But I love liturgical music and I love instrumental music. And I had carried, pre-miscarriage, I loved to find songs and sometimes put texts together to other music and see what happens. And so for me, the beauty was the beauty of music and the beauty of song, and finding songs of lament and songs of endurance in the face of all of this darkness. And coming to Redeemer became part of a community where people are creating their own music. And I'll never be a Nathan Partain, I'll never be a Tom Peck, but being around them has given me encouragement to every once in a while come up with my own music. And so through the experience of miscarriage, I've come up with a couple of songs, and I've taken texts that other people have written and I've put tunes to them, and that has been a source of healing for me. Another source of healing has been finding ways to see where the narrative of miscarriage and grief and ostracism is playing out in other domains of life. And that for me has been vocationally. For Christine, the narrative and the parallels work, but I'll tell you about my story. So in 2004, when we had our first 2 miscarriages, I was working for a fuel cell company, and the fuel cell industry collapsed. And I had a role that was looking at how do we recover from this? How do we make things better? How do we learn from our experiences? And then talking with my colleagues, I realized that they were articulating a lot of the same emotions that I was experiencing with miscarriage. So I threw myself into this kind of what happens when organizations collapse, because it was a way to look at my grief. There was language that I could hold on to that I didn't have if I just said I'm thinking about miscarriage. And so it was part of what I did with the fuel cell company. It was part of some PhD research that I did. And then being in the aerospace industry for the last 15 years, the aerospace industry is very cyclical. And sometimes it's up and sometimes it's down. And when it's down, work is being taken away jobs are being taken away, and you get the chance to talk to people about how is this being handled well or poorly. And so I've camped on this, and I've done some work in the academic world to say, right, this narrative of you can have kids whenever you want doesn't equip people for how hard parenthood really is and how uncertain it is. And when you train engineering students and say you can go off and start your own company and be part of amazing new product development, tech hubs, blah, 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 you don't equip them for how hard that is and for the challenges that are there. And when they face those challenges, they feel a lot of the same experiences of shame and isolation and ostracism. And in the workplace, you have opportunities to speak mercy and grace, and you have opportunities to do a lot of pain, just as we do when we encounter miscarriage. One place where this hit home in 2018 was in one of its many downturns, and we had to move a bunch of work from Indianapolis to the office in the UK. And I was a program manager over part of the work that had to be shut down. And for the last kind of 3 months of 2018, part of what I was involved was discussions with the resource managers. Okay, we're shutting down the work. When is it going to finish? Where are people going afterwards? And there was a lot of stress in that experience. And I realized a little while into it, that part of what was going on was I was having flashbacks to the miscarriages. And the line of thinking went something like, when my children died, I had no power. And all I could do was sit and watch. And I could do nothing while they died. Now I have power. And with my power in the organization, I have to protect the jobs of these people who are working on the program that I was overseeing. And if I don't do that, if they don't get jobs because of what I did, then not only will I have failed these people, but I will have failed my children, because I will have dishonored that memory by not being able to use my power. Again, think through that rationally is a completely flawed way of looking at things. But I had to draw the connection and go through a cycle of processing the grief to say, you know what? Yes, it's hard to watch your children die, and it's hard to be powerless when that happens. And it's hard in an organization when change that's of this disruptive level happens. And it's hard to face the uncertainty and not know whether you're going to have a job or the people around you are going to have a job. And it's okay for that to hurt. And it's okay to acknowledge that that hurts. But no, Sean, you are not responsible for your children's death, and you are not responsible for what happens in the aftermath. You're not solely responsible for what happens in the aftermath of this restructuring. Okay, that's the end of what I wanted to talk about. I will make one plug, and then Brandon's going to come help me sing a song. So the plug, apologies, this is a shameless sales pitch. I have a book. There are very few books about miscarriage. There are very few books about fathers in miscarriage. The book is not just for fathers. It tells a story of somebody who grieved, and it is there for other people who grieve. So if you know somebody who would find it useful, please talk to me, because I would love to place the book in the hands of people who can find it useful. Now, we're going to close by singing a song. This ties to a redemptive force of music for me. This is a song that I learned when we were living in England. I went to a service at the local cathedral. It's called a Saying Goodbye service. So the Saying Goodbye service are run at churches in the UK, and they're for anybody who's lost a child, whether it's pregnancy loss or other forms of loss. And this was one of the songs that they sang in that service. And the text was really meaningful for me, so I'm going to share it with you. The tune is Morning Has Broken, so hopefully familiar. Brandon's graciously agreed to help me out. As you're able, please sing along. It'll be a lot more fun if everybody's singing and it's not just me. So we'll sing the song, and then we'll move into, I'm happy to take some questions if you want, or we'll move into small group discussions. We known yet ever remembered. These are our children now and always. These who we see not, we will forget not. Morning and evening, all of our days. Lives that touched our lives tenderly briefly. Now in the one light living always. Named in our hearts now, safe from harm now. We will remember all of our days. As we recall them, silently name them. Open our hearts, Lord, now and always. Grant to us grieving love for giving, strength for each other, all of our days. Safe in your peace, Lord, hold these our children. Peace, light, and laughter, grant them each day. Cherish and hold them till we meet them. When to your glory we find our